4 premium 50mm lenses, 4 very different price points, but which one is the best? Well, despite this price difference, all of these options share a number of similarities when it comes to design and features. They all offer a dust and splash-proof construction, and they also include customizable AF lock buttons. Albeit both the Sonys include 2 buttons, whilst the Samyang and Sigma settle for just 1. The Sigma and the Sony lenses all feature a manual aperture dial that can be declicked using a switch on the side, though only the Sigma and the newer Sony f1.4 version have the option to lock this dial in place, which is something to bear in mind if you don't plan on using this feature very often, as it allows you to keep it locked into auto mode, and then you can just change the aperture using the back of your camera instead. The Samyang stands out from the pack in a few areas. Firstly, its build is predominantly made from a lightweight composite plastic material, whilst the other lenses are mostly made from metal. Now, I know some people love this because it helps to keep the lens nice and lightweight, but others prefer a more robust metal finish. So which do you prefer? Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, it should be mentioned that although the Samyang doesn't include a dedicated aperture ring, it gets around this by featuring a customizable switch. By default, mode 1 allows the focus dial just to operate as you would expect, but toggle this to mode 2 and you'll now be able to use the focus dial as kind of a makeshift aperture dial, which is pretty cool. This switch can be further customized, and other functions of this lens can be fine-tuned by plugging the lens into your computer using a Samyang lens dock, though you will have to purchase this separately. In terms of handling, I've really got no complaints when it comes to focusing manually. All of these lenses feel really nice and linear despite using a fly-by-wire system. The Sigma and the Samyang do have a heavier resistance to them and a 180-degree throw, whilst the Sonys were both much looser and only required a 90-degree turn to complete a full focus pull. When it comes to focus breathing, the Samyang was the best performer by some margin, with the other contenders displaying heavy amounts of breathing. Though that said, it's worth bearing in mind that if you own one of the newer Sony cameras with focus breathing compensation, then you can just activate this and pretty much eliminate this issue with both of the Sony lenses. However, this feature isn't compatible with third-party options, so that means that the Sigma lens is arguably the one to avoid if this is something that really bothers you. In good lighting conditions, the autofocus motors on these lenses are rapid to focus and showed absolutely no signs of hunting. In low light conditions, although the AF slowed slightly for all of the lenses, none of them provided any issues and managed to find the target every time. When shooting wide open in continuous burst mode, almost all of the shots I took with these lenses were sharp and in focus, so a pretty impressive performance across the board. To make things fair, I set the Sony f1.2 lens to f1.4 for this test, though I did also retest this lens at f1.2 and I got the same exact results, with the vast majority of the shots being pin sharp and in focus. Switching over to video mode, with all of these lenses set to f1.4 once again, and tracking a target moving towards the camera, all of these lenses were able to keep up with the action. Repeating this test at a faster pace, all of them continued to perform well, albeit for the Samyang, which would very occasionally falter right as George was closest to the lens. Like with the previous photo tests, I also retested the Sony f1.2 lens at f1.2, and this thing was absolutely faultless once again. As for AF noise, all of these lenses are practically silent. When shooting with these lenses in a real-world scenario, I found all of them to be well suited for professional video work, and I really don't have any major complaints to make. The wealth of manual controls on these lenses just make them a joy to use, either handheld or whilst mounted to a gimbal, and they all appear to work well whilst using my Sony a7 Mark IV's face detection. If I was really nitpicking, the only thing I would say is that the custom switch design on the Samyang does take a little bit of getting used to, and on occasion I would just forget to switch it back from mode 2 to mode 1 when I was adjusting the aperture, and instead of refining the focus, I would find myself accidentally adjusting the aperture. So most of the time I just found that I left it alone and set the aperture value using the back of my camera instead. But like I said, this is just a minor point and probably wasn't helped by the fact that I was regularly switching between 4 of these lenses, so my muscle memory was just all over the place. In our bokeh balls test, obviously the Sony f1.2 produces slightly larger orbs than the other lenses thanks to its slightly wider maximum aperture. However, in terms of bokeh ball shape, they all offer round orbs at the very center, which become increasingly misshapen as they near the corners of the frame. As for general bokeh quality, the f1.2 lens offers a slightly thicker and smoother defocused area when compared directly to the f1.4 options, which all provide a similar kind of result. In our lens flare test, the Sigma is the best of the bunch, with very little flaring shown at all. Whilst the other lenses do exhibit some flaring, though I've got to say, definitely not the worst results I've ever seen. And besides, all of these lenses do come included with lens hoods to help protect against this type of thing when shooting in harsh lighting conditions. On our longitudinal chromatic aberration test, all of the lenses displayed varying levels of green fringing above the area of sharp focus, and either red or, in the case of the f1.2 lens, purple fringing at the bottom of the chart. Now, if that doesn't mean a lot to you, basically the key thing to take away here is that the Samyang was the worst offender of the bunch with the strongest coloration across the chart, whilst the Sony f1.4 lens was the clear winner with the cleanest looking test results. Ultimately though, when shooting out in the real world, all of these lenses are more than capable of providing amazing professional looking photos. Now, if you've watched my videos before, you'll know that I am a huge fan of the 50mm focal length. I find that it's just such a versatile lens, and it's a great choice for portraits in particular, especially when shooting out on location, as the focal length means that it's not quite a telephoto lens, meaning that you can still pack in plenty of the surrounding scenery without having to stand, miles away from your model. But at the same time, it's not a wide angle, so you don't really need to worry about distortion, creating a less flattering result when shooting close up. In regards to these specific 50mm options that we're testing, I honestly couldn't fault any of them in terms of their performance and handling. Now, before receiving the Sony 50mm f1.2, I was fully expecting it to be noticeably heavier and larger than the rest of them. And although on paper it is technically the heaviest of the bunch, in reality, once it's strapped to the front of your full frame body, the slight increase in weight is hardly noticeable, and all of these options do feel really nicely balanced. That said though, I must admit the Samyang does feel incredibly lightweight, so if traveling as light as possible is something you prioritize, then this could be a swaying factor. Now, as you can probably see, trying to decide which of these lenses is the sharpest option from these images alone would be an almost impossible task. So heading over to the test charts, with all of the lenses set to f1.4, we can see that the f1.2 lens is the sharpest of the bunch at the center. The Sigma and the Sony f1.4 are pretty much neck and neck, and the Samyang unfortunately resolves a marginally softer image in comparison. At the corners of the frame, the Sony lenses offer the best edge-to-edge sharpness. The Sigma is in a close second place, with the Samyang yet again trailing behind with a noticeable soft result. But how does the f1.2 option compare when shooting wide open at f1.2? Well, as you would expect from a 2-grand lens, it's still the sharpest of the bunch both at the center and at the corners. Now, back once again at f1.4, but this time shooting at the lens's minimum focusing distances, the Sony f1.2 is the clear winner, though the other lenses are still pretty sharp. Even when stopping the f1.2 lens wide open to f1.2, it still resolves the sharpest results of the bunch. So after seeing all of these test results, which lens should you buy? Well, clearly the Sony f1.2 offers the pinnacle of sharpness and has the best looking bokeh, which is kind of to be expected considering the huge price tag and the wider maximum aperture. But just because something is the best lens, it doesn't always mean that it's the best lens for you. And in my mind, this is how I would break it down. The Samyang is your bargain option for those who don't really care too much about having the sharpest possible lens, but still want the benefit of owning a 50mm with a super wide aperture of f1.4. On the other end of the scale, we have the Sony 50mm f1.2, which is just hideously expensive, but also insanely good. It's arguably the best 50mm lens currently available for Sony E-Mount cameras, but let's be honest, it will probably only be purchased by professionals who use 50mm lenses a lot, or by photographers who have a serious gas problem. For everyone else, it's really a toss-up between the Sigma and the Sony f1.4, and that decision will ultimately come down to the size of your budget. Now, if it was down to me, I would be seriously tempted to save up the extra cash and get the Sony f1.4, because for your money, you are getting top-tier image quality and features, so this lens gets my top pick. However, if you really can't stretch your budget that far, then don't worry, because the Sigma 50mm f1.4 is still a fantastic choice that you really wouldn't be disappointed with, and so it rightfully claims my runner-up spot.